There's a place, tucked gently into the northwestern corner of the United States, where the earth still whispers of its past, not with words but with warmth, with steam, with slow, silent movement underfoot. We know it today as Yellowstone, a national park full of quiet forests, roaming wildlife, and crystalline rivers. But this column is not the whole story. If you look closely, if you listen beneath the bird's song and rustling pines, you'll feel it, the heat, the pressure, the memory of something older than the mountains. Because Yellowstone was not born in peace, it was born in fire. To understand Yellowstone's beginning, we have to look deeper than soil, deeper than rock. We have to go down into the mantle of the earth, where temperatures are so high and pressures so immense that rock itself flows. Slowly, yes, but it moves like thick liquid, like something almost alive. It's here, some 17 million years ago, that a massive plume of superheated mantle rock began to rise. No explosion, no sudden drama, just a patient, unstoppable push from below. Geologists call this a hot spot, not a place of flame, but a vertical column of molten rock rising from the depths of the Earth's interior, driven by forces we still don't fully understand. This particular hotspot sat more or less still in the mantle, but the land above it, the North American tectonic plate, was on the move. Inch by inch, century by century, it drifted westward over the hotspot, like a slow-moving raft floating over a candle flame. And just as a piece of paper passed over fire will burn in a trail, the North American plate left a series of fiery footprints behind. One after another, massive volcanic eruptions carved their marks into the land. Not mountain peaks, like we might expect, but sunken scars, each formed by eruptions so powerful they emptied entire chambers of magma and caused the ground above to collapse. This trail stretches from the border of Nevada and Oregon all the way through southern Idaho, forming the ancient volcanic Snake River Plain. And at the very end of that trail, where the hot spot still quietly bubbles below, is Yellowstone, the most recent and most active part of this fiery journey. Yellowstone itself has experienced 3 cataclysmic eruptions, each one reshaping the land in ways difficult to fully grasp. The first, about 2.1 million years ago, was the largest, forming what we now call the Huckleberry Ridge Caldera. This eruption released more than 2,400 cubic kilometers of volcanic material, enough to bury the state of California under a layer of ash several feet thick. The second came about 1.3 million years ago, forming the smaller Mesa Falls caldera. And the third, the one most often spoken of, occurred around 640,000 years ago. This eruption created the Yellowstone caldera, a vast 30 by 45 mile depression in the earth, its rim now disguised by forests and rivers and the illusion of stillness. To imagine the scale of these eruptions, try to picture a modern volcano like Mount St. Helens, a powerful event to be sure, but one that released barely a fraction of the energy of a Yellowstone eruption. Mount St. Helens produced just over 1 cubic kilometer of material. Yellowstone's last eruption, over 1,000 times that. It wasn't just a volcanic event, it was a geologic upheaval that sent ash clouds across the continent, coating what's now the Midwest in layers of fine volcanic dust. The sun dimmed, ecosystems were disrupted, the shape of the land changed forever. But despite its explosive history, Yellowstone today is a place of peace. And perhaps that's what makes it so fascinating, the contrast between what it once was and what it has become. You walk through wildflower meadows, never suspecting the ground beneath you once collapsed into itself with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs. You watch a bison graze beside a gently steaming spring, unaware that the very heat rising from the earth is a leftover breath from a fire that nearly tore the land apart. That contrast between violence and calm, between destruction and rebirth, is the essence of Yellowstone, because after each eruption, life found its way back. Over thousands of years, the ash settled, rain fell, seeds took root in volcanic soil, trees grew, animals returned, and rivers found new paths. The land that had been scoured by heat became lush again, a phoenix not from flame, but from cooled lava and time. Even today, signs of that rebirth are everywhere. You can see them in the layers of rock that make up Yellowstone's canyons, colored bands of lava flows and ash, each one a page in the story of fire and renewal. You can feel them in the warmth of the ground, especially in places like Norris Geyser Basin or the boiling edge of Yellowstone Lake, where the earth still pulses softly beneath your feet. And if you're still and quiet enough, you might even hear it. Not a sound, exactly, but a sense, a presence. The earth, still moving, because Yellowstone is far from dormant. It is what geologists call an active volcanic system. Not in the way of constant eruptions, but in slow, subtle motion. The magma chamber beneath Yellowstone still exists, still pushing heat upward. Scientists monitor its shape with satellite data, watching as the ground gently rises or sinks each year by a few centimeters. The caldera breathing in and out. Over 1,000 small earthquakes ripple through the region annually. Most are imperceptible, little more than a soft twitch in the crust, but they tell a story. The earth is shifting, always adjusting. In fact, if you were to strip away the forest and soil and peer deep beneath the park, you'd see something extraordinary. The magma chamber stretches out like an underground sea of semi-molten rock, nearly 40 miles long and over 12 miles wide. And beneath that, more heat, more partially melted stone, a lower mantle reservoir that fuels the system like a furnace beneath a kettle. This dual chamber system is vast, complex, and constantly evolving. Not dangerous in an immediate sense, but certainly alive. And yet, despite this activity, there's no reason to worry. Modern science has given us tools to observe Yellowstone in exquisite detail. GPS stations track ground motion. Seismic sensors detect the faintest tremors. Gas emissions are measured. Temperatures are logged. The park is one of the most closely monitored volcanic systems in the world. Not because it's about to erupt, but because it teaches us so much about how our planet works. Every bubble of gas, every microquake, every puff of steam is a clue. A piece of the puzzle in understanding not just Yellowstone, but the very heart of the Earth. Of course, Yellowstone is more than just a volcano. It is also a canvas, painted over and over again by glaciers, by wind, by water. After the last great eruption, glaciers covered much of the region, carving out valleys and polishing the mountains. They melted, leaving behind the clear lakes and deep canyons we see today. The Yellowstone River, now so calm and meandering in places, was once a torrent of glacial melt, rushing through a landscape still warm from the fire below. And so, we find ourselves in a place that has been shaped not just once, but again and again, by fire, by ice, by time. Each layer of Yellowstone is a chapter in a story that spans millennia. You can touch a stone here that was once molten. You can stand in a field that rose from the ashes, and you can listen to the ground, not in fear, but in wonder, knowing that you are standing on something ancient, something patient, something still writing its story beneath your feet. In the end, Yellowstone reminds us that the earth is never truly still. It moves, it breathes, it changes, sometimes with a roar, but more often with a whisper of steam from a hidden vent, a gentle tremble beneath the trees, a slow rise in the earth, imperceptible but constant. And in those movements, in that quiet dance of geology and time, we find something beautiful, something humbling. We find a place that was born of fire, and yet, somehow, feels like peace. Beneath the grass, beneath the soil, beneath even the solid layers of stone that hold up Yellowstone's familiar landscape, something waits. It does not sleep, it does not rush, it simply is. A presence that's as old as the land itself, a reservoir of heat and movement, flowing silently in the darkness. It's easy to think of the earth as still, to imagine it as something solid, settled, dependable. But beneath our feet lies a world we rarely see, one that hums with energy and change. Here in Yellowstone, that hidden world is closer to the surface than almost anywhere else on Earth. And though we may never walk through it or lay eyes on its molten depths, we have come to know it, piece by piece, layer by layer, through science, through patience, and through listening. The story of Yellowstone's underground begins with the word that captures so much attention: supervolcano. It's a term that stirs the imagination and sometimes stokes a bit of fear. But in truth, the word is more scientific than sensational. A supervolcano is defined not by shape or danger, but by scale. Specifically, by the volume of material it can erupt. At least 1,000 cubic kilometers of ash, lava, and rock. Yellowstone, with its ancient eruptions, far surpasses that threshold. It is not a point of worry, but a point of awe. The land beneath this park is part of one of the largest volcanic systems on the planet. But unlike many volcanoes, Yellowstone doesn't take the familiar form of a towering peak. There is no single mountain looming over the park. No sharp cone like Mount Fuji or Mount Rainier. Instead, Yellowstone is shaped like a basin, a caldera, vast and sunken. Its rim is not a cliff, but a series of gentle hills, eroded by time and softened by forests. Its mouth is not a crater, but a sprawling landscape filled with meadows, lakes, and valleys. It is a volcano turned inside out, its violence long past, its scars hidden beneath the surface, and yet the heat remains. Just a few miles below Yellowstone's surface lies a complex, dynamic system. Two enormous magma reservoirs stacked one above the other, connected like chambers in a vast underground cathedral. The upper chamber, closer to the surface, is filled with a mixture of molten rock and solid crystal. It spans nearly 40 miles in length and about 12 miles in width. Beneath that is a second chamber, deeper still and even larger. This lower reservoir extends almost 200 miles into the mantle, a slow-moving sea of molten material that feeds the system from below. This is the true engine of Yellowstone, not a ticking time bomb, but a churning furnace. It's the source of the park's geothermal features, its earthquakes, and the subtle uplift and settling of the land above. And while we can't see these chambers directly, we know they're there, not from imagination, but from decades of careful observation. Scientists have mapped Yellowstone's underground using a technique known as seismic tomography. a kind of geological X-ray. By studying the speed of earthquake waves as they pass through the earth, researchers can create a three-dimensional image of what lies below. Where the waves slow down, there's likely heat. Where they speed up, there may be cooler or denser rock. Over time, these patterns have revealed the shape and size of Yellowstone's inner workings. Other tools have filled in the picture. GPS stations scattered across the park measure ground movement with millimeter precision. These instruments tell us when the land is rising, swelling slightly like a balloon, or sinking as if the pressure has eased. At times, Yellowstone's surface lifts by several centimeters each year. Other times, it gently falls. These motions are not cause for concern. They are natural, expected behaviors in a dynamic volcanic system. The Earth here is simply adjusting itself. Gas emissions are another clue. Steam vents, hot springs, and geysers release a cocktail of gases. Water vapor, of course, but also carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and traces of noble gases from deep within the mantle. By sampling and analyzing these emissions, geologists can estimate how much heat and gas are rising from below, and what kinds of materials are interacting underground. Some gases, like helium-3, come almost entirely from the Earth's interior, a fingerprint of the mantle's hidden breath. Then, there are the earthquakes. Yellowstone experiences hundreds, sometimes thousands of them each year. Most so small they're felt only by instruments. But each one tells a story. As rock shifts, cracks, and grinds deep underground, seismic waves ripple outward. Sometimes the quakes come in clusters, known as earthquake swarms. These swarms are not unusual, and they don't necessarily signal trouble. Rather, they suggest that fluids, like water, steam, or even magma, are moving through the crust, rearranging the pressure, whispering softly in the dark. Despite all this movement, Yellowstone has not erupted in 640,000 years. And that's important to remember. Volcanic systems operate on a scale of time very different from ours. Thousands, even millions of years between major events. The chance of a large eruption in our lifetimes is extraordinarily low. What we are witnessing now is not the buildup to an eruption, but the normal activity of a living, breathing planet. Still, the study of Yellowstone offers more than just scientific curiosity. It helps us understand how volcanic systems work around the world. It teaches us about the structure of Earth's crust, about how heat moves through rock, and about the delicate balance between pressure and release. And, perhaps more than anything, it humbles us, reminds us that we are standing on something ancient, something immense, something very much alive. This deep Earth presence gives rise to Yellowstone's most iconic features, its geysers, its hot springs, its mud pots, and fumaroles. These are not random curiosities, but surface expressions of the heat below. When rainwater or snowmelt seeps into the ground, it travels downward until it meets the heat from the magma chambers. There, it turns to steam, builds pressure, and searches for a way back to the surface. Sometimes it emerges in a gentle puff, like the mist rising from a quiet spring. Other times, it bursts upward in a spectacular eruption, a geyser throwing water high into the sky. The entire park sits atop a vast and fractured network of underground plumbing. Channels, reservoirs, and cracks through which water and steam rise. It's this fragile, changeable system that makes Yellowstone so dynamic. And because it's always shifting, No two visits to the park are ever quite the same. Geysers go quiet for years, then suddenly reawaken. New springs appear where none were before. The ground warps ever so slightly, altering the flow of water. It's not chaos, it's evolution. Slow, geologic, inevitable. And so, Yellowstone teaches us patience. It reminds us that change does not always come quickly, that most of the Earth's transformations happen in silence, beneath the surface, over spans of time we can scarcely comprehend. It shows us that what we see on the surface, the beauty, the wildness, the calm, is only part of the story. To stand in Yellowstone is to stand on the rim of something vast and hidden. To walk through its forests and meadows is to walk across the roof of a sleeping giant, not in fear, but in reverence, because what lies beneath is not simply dangerous, it is also creative. It is the force that shaped this land, that gave it its rivers and valleys, that carved out the canvas upon which life now flourishes. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that even the most violent forces can give rise to beauty, that heat and pressure can lead to rebirth, and that somewhere far below, in the molten heart of the earth, the story of Yellowstone continues, slow, silent, and always unfolding. If you walk through Yellowstone on a still morning, before the sun rises high, before the footsteps of hikers and the soft hum of distant cars begin, you may find yourself in a place that feels like the edge of another world. The air is cool and damp. The ground beneath your boots gives off a quiet warmth, and in every direction, delicate wisps of steam drift upward from the earth like breath on a winter's day. It's as if the land itself is alive and quietly exhaling. This is one of the most enchanting features of Yellowstone, the way it seems to breathe, not metaphorically, but physically, chemically, thermally. Beneath its wildflowers and pine forests lies a living engine of heat, and every geyser, every bubbling spring, every plume of vapor is a window into that unseen energy. Here, on the surface, the deep volcanic story we explored in earlier chapters begins to express itself, not through violent eruptions or flowing lava, but through patience, water, and heat. Yellowstone is home to more geothermal features than anywhere else on Earth, over 10,000 individual features, in fact, from hissing steam vents to seething mud pots to the world's tallest regularly erupting geyser. Together, they form one of the most extraordinary natural systems ever discovered, a planet's breath made visible. To understand this world above ground, we must begin again beneath it, this time not with magma alone, but with water. When rain and snow fall across the high plateaus and forests of Yellowstone, much of it runs off into rivers, but some of it seeps down, slowly and silently, through cracks in the Earth's crust. It drips between layers of ancient volcanic rock, collecting minerals, absorbing warmth. As it sinks, it approaches the still hot layers near the upper magma chamber. There, deep underground, the water heats to hundreds of degrees. Under normal conditions, water would boil, but in Yellowstone, the pressure from the overlying rock is so great that it remains in a kind of suspended state, liquid, but close to boiling, until eventually it finds a way out. That's where the magic begins. Some of this superheated water returns to the surface in the form of hot springs. These are quiet, steady pools, some shallow and shimmering, others deep and still. They may look calm, but beneath their surface, water is constantly cycling, rising up, cooling, falling again. This convection process keeps the spring hot, keeps the minerals moving and creates some of the park's most breathtaking colors. If you've ever seen a photo of Yellowstone's Grand Prismatic Spring, you know what I mean. From above, it looks like a living eye, deep blue at the center, ringed with brilliant bands of green, yellow, orange, and red. This rainbow isn't paint or light trickery, it's life. The colors come from thermophiles, heat-loving microorganisms that thrive in different temperature zones. Blue in the middle, where it's hottest, orange and red at the edges, where the water cools slightly. These microbial mats are tiny, invisible to the naked eye, yet they build vast colonies, coating the surfaces of hot springs with vibrant, living color, and each color is a clue to the temperature of the water. In a way, you're looking at a heat map made of life. Elsewhere, water doesn't emerge so peacefully. In some areas, it erupts in rhythmic bursts, scalding water shooting high into the air, carried by sudden releases of underground pressure. These are Yellowstone's geysers, and the park has more than half of all the geysers in the world. The most famous is, of course, Old Faithful, a name that calls to mind reliability, routine, and quiet grandeur. Every 90 minutes or so, give or take, Old Faithful sends a jet of boiling water skyward, often reaching heights of over 100 feet. For more than a century, it's been one of Yellowstone's most iconic sites, not because it's the biggest, but because it's consistent. Its underground plumbing system is just the right combination of narrow, winding passages and deep water reservoirs. Pressure builds, steam forms, and when the pressure exceeds the strength of the rock holding it back, the geyser erupts, a perfectly timed release, like a breath held too long. But Old Faithful is far from alone. Some geysers erupt with more chaos, more drama, and far less predictability. One such wonder is Steamboat Geyser, located in the Norris Geyser Basin. Steamboat is the tallest currently active geyser in the world, capable of sending water over 300 feet into the air, a true tower of steam and spray. But unlike Old Faithful, Steamboat is irregular. It might go silent for days, weeks, even years, and then erupt with thunderous force. Scientists still don't fully understand what governs its timing, but maybe that's part of the beauty, that Yellowstone holds some secrets tight, even as it gives others away. And then, there are the fumaroles. Steam vents that hiss and breathe without ever producing liquid water. These are the hottest of Yellowstone's surface features, and often the loudest. Stand beside one and you'll hear it. The sharp, constant exhale of superheated gas escaping through narrow cracks. Some fumaroles release only water vapor. Others carry trace amounts of volcanic gases, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and even tiny amounts of mercury. The smell is distinct, a sulfurous sharpness, like eggs left too long on the stove. It's not pleasant, exactly, but it's unforgettable. A scent that reminds you this is not ordinary ground. Nearby, you'll often find another strange expression of geothermal energy, the mud pot. These odd, bubbling pits look like something out of a dream. Thick, gray, and always in motion, they belch and gurgle with an almost playful rhythm. What you're seeing is the result of acidic groundwater dissolving the surrounding rock into clay. As steam rises through the mixture, it creates a kind of natural, boiling mud stew. Some pots sputter like thick porridge, others slap and pop like slow-cooked lava. They may be whimsical to look at, but they, too, are signs of the volcano's breath. All these features, the springs, the geysers, the fumaroles, the bubbling clay, exist because Yellowstone's underground plumbing is fragile, shifting, and alive. Earthquakes can rearrange the channels. Mineral deposits can clog them. Geysers that once erupted regularly may go quiet for decades, while others reawaken unexpectedly. Entire basins can change with time, reshaped by the slow shifting of the land. And yet, despite this change, there's something deeply peaceful about Yellowstone's geothermal features. They are unpredictable, yes, but also ancient, patient, and elemental. They remind us that the Earth is not merely a solid thing. It breathes, it steams, it sighs. If you sit long enough beside a quiet, hot spring, you'll start to notice the rhythm, the pulse, the way the water rolls gently at the edges, the way the steam rises in lazy spirals, the way the ground hums with warmth. It's a kind of music, a song written in heat and water, without words or notes, just a feeling, a presence. And within that presence, there is more than geology. There is life. In the steaming edges of thermal pools and the colorful mats along their shores, strange and ancient organisms make their home. These thermophiles, some of the oldest forms of life on Earth, thrive in conditions that would kill most other creatures. They metabolize sulfur, they endure boiling heat. Some may even resemble the earliest life that ever formed in Earth's oceans, billions of years ago. Studying them has led to medical breakthroughs, genetic discoveries, and even helped shape our search for life beyond Earth. Because if something can survive in the superheated, acidic pools of Yellowstone, perhaps something could survive on Mars, or Europa, or in the oceans beneath the crust of a distant moon. In Yellowstone, life clings to the very edge of the impossible and thrives. And so, when we walk through these steaming landscapes, we're not just seeing a park, we're seeing a crossroads, a place where heat meets water, where life meets stone, where ancient forces meet modern curiosity. Every plume of steam is a breath, every geyser a heartbeat, every mineral deposit a slow whisper of time. Yellowstone is not a museum. It's not a frozen relic of a past eruption. It's a living system, as dynamic and changeable as any weather pattern or tide. To witness it is to witness the Earth in its most vulnerable, most revealing form, not hidden behind mountains or buried beneath oceans, but open, visible, even audible. Here the Earth speaks, and for those who take the time to listen, it has so much to say. As you leave a geothermal area, whether it's the sprawling basins of Midway or the quiet pools of West Thumb, you might find yourself turning back, watching the steam curl in the wind one last time, wondering what's happening beneath, wondering how something so wild could be so quiet. But that's Yellowstone, a place that doesn't shout, a place that breathes. Yellowstone is often seen as a place of fire, a realm of steam and stone, of geysers and hot springs, of ancient energy beneath the soil. And while all of that is true, there is another layer to this place, a softer rhythm, a quieter transformation, one that doesn't rise from underground, but descends from the sky and moves with the passage of days and light. It is the rhythm of the seasons, and here, in this high, wild land, they are more than mere changes in weather. They are the great breath of the park itself, because Yellowstone is not a place of one identity. It is many parks in one, layered by time, reshaped each year by temperature and snowmelt, migration and bloom. To walk through Yellowstone in the depth of winter is to witness a world entirely different from that of a summer's morning or an autumn dusk. The light falls differently, the animals move differently. Even the sounds are not the same. We begin, as all things do in this part of the world, with spring. Spring in Yellowstone is not sudden. It does not arrive with trumpets or fanfare. It creeps, slowly, carefully, like a shy guest unsure if the land is ready to receive it. In March and even April, much of the park remains gripped in winter's hand. Snow lingers on the slopes. Lakes are still frozen in silence, and yet there are signs, tiny, barely visible shifts that tell us the earth is stirring. A stream, once locked in ice, now murmurs beneath a crust of thaw. A patch of grass appears along a sun-warmed ridge. The first ravens, bold and black, circle overhead. And then, one morning, a distant sound, a low, rumbling grunt, the sound of bison. They come early, shaggy, stoic, their massive forms trudging through snow that can still reach their bellies. But they know the land better than we do. They follow the warmth, the rising sun, the steaming valleys where the snow melts first. Along the Firehole River and in the geothermal basins, the snow gives way sooner than elsewhere. And it's here, in the cradle of warmth, that spring begins in earnest. Soon, the rivers swell with snowmelt. Water rushes from the mountains, churning through canyons, flooding meadows. Trees, long dormant, begin to bud. Tiny flowers push through the softened ground, painting the landscape with purples and yellows and whites. Grizzlies emerge from hibernation, groggy and cautious. Elk calves wobble into the world on uncertain legs. By the time summer arrives, Yellowstone has transformed. Now the rivers run clear and fast. The valleys, once shadowed by snow, are wide and green. Meadows ripple in the wind like inland seas. Wildflowers bloom in every direction. Indian paintbrush, lupine, asters, each one a flicker of color in the endless green. The air is filled with sound, buzzing insects, warbling birds, the distant murmur of water over stone. This is the season of abundance, of motion, of long golden light that stretches late into the evening. Herds of elk graze along riverbanks. Wolf packs travel the valleys. Bald eagles soar overhead, scanning the meadows for movement. And the bears, grizzlies and black bears alike, wander the hillsides, feeding on roots, berries, and the occasional careless ground squirrel. Human visitors arrive too. Roads open, boardwalks fill, cameras click. But even among the crowds, there is space. Yellowstone is vast, over 2 million acres, and you can still find quiet. Step just a little off the beaten path, and the silence returns. You might hear only your footsteps, the wind in the lodgepole pines, or the soft bubbling of a nearby spring. And yet, for all its beauty, summer here is short, brief as a sigh. For in the high country, autumn comes early. By late August or early September, the nights grow cooler. The air sharpens, crisp and clear. Aspen leaves begin to turn, first yellow, then gold, flickering in the wind like tiny lanterns. The great elk rut begins, echoing through the valleys as bull elk bugle to one another, challenging, calling, claiming. It is a haunting sound, part whistle, part roar, and it carries for miles. Animals grow restless, bison begin to move toward winter range. Birds gather in flocks, preparing for journeys south. Bears feed constantly, digging roots, stripping berry bushes, overturning logs for insects, all to build the fat they'll need for the long months ahead. In the high elevations, Snow may already dust the peaks, a warning of what's to come. Autumn in Yellowstone is fleeting but unforgettable. The light turns golden, the days shorten. There is a hush to the landscape, a sense that something is ending or perhaps just beginning again. The geysers still erupt, the springs still steam, but the crowd's thin. The air carries a hint of wood smoke, of frost, of change. And then, winter. In Yellowstone, winter does not simply arrive, it claims the land. With snow, with silence, with a cold so deep, it feels like the earth itself is sleeping. Temperatures plunge below zero, rivers freeze, snow piles high, blanketing forests, softening sharp ridges, erasing the details of the land. And yet this is not death, it is rest. Bison huddle together, their thick coats rimmed with frost. They use their heads to push aside the snow, uncovering the grasses below. Wolves, lean and silent, travel long distances across the frozen valleys, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air. Coyotes trot single file through drifts, following old trails. Otters slide playfully along riverbanks. And in the dens beneath the snow, life waits. For humans, Yellowstone in winter is another world entirely. Many roads close. The only access may be by snowmobile, ski, or snow coach. The silence is profound. Sounds are muffled. Time seems slower. And the geothermal features, ever steaming, ever breathing, become all the more mysterious against the snow. Geysers erupt into freezing air, instantly cloaked in clouds of ice crystals. Hot springs glow blue against fields of white. Fumaroles hiss like kettles in the stillness. It is a dreamscape, cold, quiet, otherworldly. And yet, even in the coldest months, life endures. Because Yellowstone has always been a place of resilience, of rhythm, of returning. And so, when the days begin to lengthen again, and the first meltwater runs down the slopes, the cycle begins anew. Spring rises from the snow. The bison return to the steaming valleys. The birds call. The rivers swell. In Yellowstone, each season is a chapter in a larger story. Each one reshapes the land in subtle ways, with light, with sound, with movement. There is no best time to see the park. Only different windows, different moods. A rainbow of time where the earth shows a different face, depending on when you choose to look. And in every season, beneath the flowers, beneath the frost, beneath the hooves and paws and migrating wings, the heat remains. That ever-present fire, silent and ancient, holding steady, reminding us that Yellowstone is not just alive, but constantly becoming. Here, time is not measured only in hours or days. It is measured in thaws and freezes, in migrations and melts, in the slow unfolding of a pine cone or the sudden hush of first snow. The earth moves, not just below the surface, but through its seasons, breathing in spring, exhaling in winter, and we, too, become part of that rhythm. For a moment, a visit, a memory, carried forward by wind, by steam, by time. To the casual visitor, Yellowstone might seem still. The wide valleys are quiet, the lakes are calm, the forests, at first glance, do not move. But stay long enough, wait, watch, listen, and you begin to sense it, the movement, the rhythm, the lives that weave silently through the trees, across the meadows, between the rivers. Yellowstone is not just a place, it is a system, a web, a living network of animal life, endlessly complex and impossibly beautiful. More than 400 species of animals, call Yellowstone home. Some are large, iconic, instantly recognizable. The lumbering bison, the elusive gray wolf, the solemn grizzly bear. Others are small, quick, overlooked. Pocket gophers, salamanders, voles that vanish into burrows before you ever see them. And then there are the birds, from bald eagles to warblers, from sandhill cranes that dance in the springtime fields, to ravens that call out from the cliffs with ancient, knowing voices. Each species plays a part. Each one is a thread. And if you pull on one thread, remove a wolf, plant a tree, alter a stream, the whole system begins to shift. To understand Yellowstone's wildlife, you must begin not with the animals themselves, but with the land, the shape of Yellowstone, its rivers, its forests, its plains, determines who lives where and how they live. The Yellowstone Plateau, a high, volcanic shelf, holds cooler temperatures and long winters. The Lamar Valley, known as the Serengeti of North America, offers wide, grassy lowlands where animals gather in astonishing numbers. And throughout the park, the elevation shifts mean that in a single day, you might climb from river bottom to alpine ridge, passing through habitats as varied as deserts and rainforests. But of all the animals that dwell here, none are more symbolic, more deeply tied to the land's identity than the bison. Bison are Yellowstone's oldest residents. Their ancestors roamed this continent long before humans did. Thick-shouldered, low-headed, with coats like shaggy tapestries of winter, they are the largest land mammals in North America. And in Yellowstone they move in herds that still echo the ancient migrations of the Great Plains. In spring and early summer, you'll see them calving in the warm, grassy basins near the rivers. In autumn, they drift toward the geothermal areas, where steam from the ground melts snow and exposes the dry grasses below. Watch a herd of bison long enough and you begin to notice the subtleties. The matriarchs, old cows with decades of knowledge, lead the way. Young calves, bright orange and wobbly-legged, dart between adults. Bulls move more slowly, more independently. They roll in the dust, rub their horns against trees, bellow in deep tones that rumble across the valley. During the rut, the air is alive with tension, challenges, posturing, short-lived battles that send snow flying in arcs beneath hooves. They are powerful. But they are not alone. Everywhere bison go, others follow. Coyotes, clever and agile, watch from a distance. They scavenge after wolves, pick at remains, and sometimes hunt small prey flushed by the great herds. Ravens, too, hover in the margins. They ride the air currents above the animals, sometimes even landing briefly on a bison's back. It's not affection, it's strategy. Ravens are opportunists, and Yellowstone offers plenty of opportunity. But perhaps no species tells Yellowstone's story more dramatically than the gray wolf. Once wolves were abundant here. They hunted elk and bison, moved silently through the forests, raised their pups in dens beneath the pines. But by the early 20th century, they were gone, hunted, poisoned, exterminated by policy and fear. For over 70 years, the howl of the wolf vanished from Yellowstone, and then, in 1995, they came back. Reintroduced into the park after decades of absence, gray wolves were brought from Canada and released into the Lamar Valley and surrounding regions. At the time, the decision was controversial. Ranchers feared for livestock, others doubted whether the wolves would survive, but the results were astonishing. Not only did the wolves thrive, they changed the park. Their return began a cascade of ecological effects now known as a trophic cascade. By preying on elk, who had grown abundant in the wolves' absence, the wolves helped reduce overgrazing in the valleys. As elk became more cautious, avoiding open meadows and riparian zones, willow and aspen trees began to regenerate. With more vegetation along rivers, beavers returned, building dams that shaped the flow of streams, creating new habitats for fish, frogs, and birds. Even songbirds, which depend on the shrubs and trees elk once devoured, increased in number, all from one change, the return of a predator. Today, wolves once again roam Yellowstone, their howls rising in the early morning light or echoing through the trees after dark. Packs like the Junction Butte or Wapiti Lake wolves are tracked by researchers, watched by tourists, and honored in stories. They are elusive, often glimpsed only as shadows moving across a ridge, but their presence is felt. They have become part of the land again. Not an enemy, not a symbol, just another thread in the great web. And then, of course, there are the bears. Yellowstone is one of the few places in the contiguous United States where both black bears and grizzly bears still roam free. Grizzlies are larger, broader, with a distinct hump of muscle above their shoulders. Black bears are smaller, more agile, more varied in color, sometimes black, sometimes cinnamon, even blonde. Bears in Yellowstone are omnivores. They eat roots, berries, fish, insects, carrion, and occasionally young elk or bison calves. In the spring, they emerge from hibernation, hungry and cautious. You may spot one flipping over rocks in a meadow, digging with incredible force for ants or ground squirrels. In late summer, they seek out berry patches, and in autumn, before denning, they enter a phase known as hyperphagia, a state of near constant feeding as they fatten for the winter. And bears, too, are part of the system. Grizzlies may usurp wolf kills. Ravens may follow bears, knowing that where a bear feeds, scraps are left behind. Even the soil is enriched by the carcasses they leave, the scat they deposit, the nutrients they cycle. They are not just residents of the land, they are its stewards. Unknowing, perhaps, but essential. But not all of Yellowstone's drama plays out on four large legs. The park is filled with quieter creatures. Pikas, tiny alpine mammals, chirp from rocky slopes, gathering grasses for their winter nests. Marmots sun themselves on boulders, fattening before their long sleep. Amphibians breed in ephemeral pools formed by snowmelt. And in the skies above, hawks, owls, eagles, and falcons drift on invisible thermals, watching the land with ancient eyes. Even the insects are part of the story. Pollinators move from flower to flower, keeping the meadows alive. Beetles break down fallen trees. Mosquitoes, yes, even them, feed bats and birds. Nothing here is separate. Everything is connected. That is the lesson Yellowstone teaches over and over again, that no animal, no plant, no feature exists alone. The wolf depends on the elk on the grass on the soil on the river on the snow on the clouds, and so on, until we find ourselves woven into the same story, not as observers, but as participants, because we, too, have shaped Yellowstone, sometimes in ways that harmed it, sometimes in ways that helped, and now, in this era of watchfulness, perhaps we are learning to step more gently, to protect not just species, but relationships, not just individuals, but the web that connects them. And so, when you next see a photo of a bison standing in the steam of a geyser, or a wolf trotting through snow beneath a gray sky, remember that they are not alone. They are part of something larger, something breathing, something alive. In Yellowstone, the animals are not ornaments. They are the park. There is a quiet power in water, not in its thunder or rush, but in its patience. It does not force its way through the world. It waits, it drips, it returns. Over years, over centuries, it wears down even the hardest stone. It carves mountains, it moves continents, grain by grain. In Yellowstone, where fire shaped the bones of the land, it is water that gave those bones their grace. Here, among the geysers and peaks, you find rivers, not just trickles or streams, but powerful winding bodies of life that cut across plateaus and plunge into canyons, that freeze and thaw and roar again. These rivers are as much a part of Yellowstone as the wildlife, the volcano, or the sky itself. They have sculpted this place with time and persistence, and their story, their long liquid memory, is as ancient and beautiful as anything on Earth. Let us begin with the Yellowstone River. It is the only major river in the lower 48 states that still runs free, undammed, untamed, allowed to follow its course as it always has. It begins in the remote southeastern corner of the park, at a place known as Yount's Peak, high in the Absaroka Range. From there, it travels northward, cutting through valleys and forests, feeding lakes and wetlands, before cascading into the very heart of the park. It is a river of paradoxes, calm in one moment, violent in the next, narrow as a ribbon or wide as a floodplain. It gives and it takes. It moves and it waits. And then, when the land opens and the stone begins to fracture, the Yellowstone River does something extraordinary. It falls at the place where the lava flows of ancient eruptions once cooled into a thick plateau. The river meets resistance. The harder volcanic rock remains, but softer materials downstream have long since eroded away. The result is the dramatic, spellbinding Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, a chasm more than 20 miles long, up to 1,200 feet deep, painted in golds and rust reds and pinks from the oxidation of iron in the rock. It is not like the Grand Canyon of Arizona, that great, dry cathedral of stone, but something more intimate, more alive. Here, mist rises from the depths. Here, the sound of water echoes endlessly between the cliffs. And it is here that the river takes two of its most iconic leaps, Upper Falls and Lower Falls. Upper Falls is powerful, wide, sudden. At 109 feet, it is tall by most standards, though here it feels like a prelude, a preparation. The river gathers itself again, twists through a narrow channel, and then it dives. Lower Falls is the most photographed waterfall in the park, and for good reason. It plunges 308 feet, nearly twice the height of Niagara, into the canyon below, with a roar that can be heard long before it is seen. On clear days, a rainbow arcs across the mist at its base. In winter, steam rises from its plunge pool, freezing in midair and coating the nearby cliffs in white. To stand on the brink of Lower Falls, to feel the vibration in the ground, to lean against the rail and look down into that endless spray, is to understand time in a new way. You see, that waterfall has not always been there, and it will not remain forever. Water is a sculptor, always carving, always erasing. What looks eternal is only passing through. But the Yellowstone River is not the only artist here. There is also the Firehole River, which flows from Madison Lake through geyser country. It is fed by thermal features, by springs and fumaroles and bubbling pools, and as such it stays unusually warm year-round. In winter, steam curls off its surface like a dream. Snow melts along its banks. Wildlife gathers at its edge, not because it is dramatic, but because it is alive. The fire hole is not grand, but it is essential. Then there's the Gibbon River, the Gardner River, the Lamar, and the Snake, each with its own voice, its own rhythm. Some cascade through narrow rock corridors, others meander lazily through sagebrush flats. Together they form the park's circulatory system, a network of arteries that carry water, nutrients, and life across the landscape. And where there are rivers, there are lakes. Yellowstone Lake is the largest high-elevation lake in North America, covering over 130 square miles and resting at nearly 8,000 feet above sea level. It is vast, cold, deep. In summer, it mirrors the sky, a sheet of silver blue stretching toward the horizon. In winter, it freezes over, thick and silent, cracked with pressure ridges and laced with snow. Beneath its surface lies something remarkable, not just water, but geothermal vents, hot springs and fumaroles on the lake bed itself. They bubble and pulse unseen, feeding minerals into the water, creating habitats for strange bacteria, and shaping the lake's ecology in ways we're only beginning to understand. Yellowstone Lake, like everything in the park, is layered, still on the surface, moving below. And beyond the rivers and lakes lies the oldest sculptor of all, ice. Long before the rivers cut canyons or the animals roamed the valleys, glaciers moved across this land. Massive sheets of ice, miles thick in some places, advanced and retreated over tens of thousands of years. They flattened ridges, they gouged out bowls, they scraped away soil and left behind glacial till, loose rocky debris that now supports forests, meadows, and marshes. You can still see the marks of the glaciers everywhere. U-shaped valleys, kettle ponds, moraines, long curved ridges of stone that once marked the edge of a glacier's reach. Yellowstone's modern landscape, with all its diversity and drama, is a product of these frozen sculptors. In a way, the park was not only born of fire, it was shaped by ice. And even now, long after the glaciers have vanished, the cold remains. Snowpack in the mountains acts as a kind of seasonal glacier, a reservoir of water that melts slowly in spring and summer, feeding the rivers, filling the lakes, nourishing the soil. Climate, fire, and water all interact in this dance, each influencing the others. A heavy snow year might mean a lush, flower-filled summer. A dry winter could mean fire. Everything is connected, nothing exists alone. And so, we return again to the rhythm of water and stone. In Yellowstone, the movement of water is never just about water. It is about life. Elk and moose drink from the streams. Fish spawn in the gravel beds. Beavers dam the channels, creating wetlands that host frogs, ducks, and dragonflies. Even bears and wolves follow the rivers, not out of habit, but out of necessity. Water is not just part of the landscape, it is the landscape. And stone, slow, silent, stoic, is the record keeper. The rocks remember everything. They hold the heat of past eruptions. They bear the scars of glaciers. They cradle the rivers in their canyons and direct the flow of waterfalls. Geologists can read these rocks like books, seeing in their layers the long history of the earth. Every color, every fracture, every grain of sediment tells a story millions of years in the making. Together, water and stone are Yellowstone's quiet architects. They do not demand attention like the geysers do. They do not roar like the bears or howl like the wolves, but they are always at work, dripping, flowing, freezing, thawing, carving and shaping, eroding and building. They are not fast, but they are relentless. They are not loud, but they are lasting. To walk beside a river in Yellowstone, to hear it murmuring over smooth rocks, to see the glint of fish beneath the surface, to feel the cool mist of a waterfall on your face, is to touch something timeless, something sacred, a current that connects the deep past with the unfolding present. Because in the end, Yellowstone is not just about what we see, it's about what we feel, the sense of age, of power, of movement so slow we almost miss it. Fire may have built the stage, but it is water that writes the script, and stone that records every line. Long before the fences, before the signs, before the idea of a park was even born, long before the roads and the ranger hats and the camera lenses pointed toward Old Faithful, Yellowstone was a home. It's easy in the quiet of a thermal basin or the wind across the Lamar Valley to forget that this place was never truly discovered. It was not a blank canvas, not a pristine wilderness awaiting human arrival. People have been part of this land for thousands of years, not as visitors, but as relatives to the rivers, the bison, the stone. To understand Yellowstone fully, we must not begin with maps or policies or presidents. We must begin with memory. Memory held not in books, but in stories passed from one generation to the next. Archaeological evidence tells us that humans have lived in the Yellowstone region for more than 11,000 years. Stone tools, hearths, projectile points, and obsidian flakes still rest quietly beneath layers of soil, whispering of long-ago campsites and hunting grounds. For some tribes, Yellowstone was a summer home, for others, a sacred pilgrimage. Some came to gather obsidian, volcanic glass that could be shaped into blades and arrowheads sharper than steel. Others came to hunt, to trade, to teach, to dream. But these artifacts, cold as stone, only tell part of the story. The deeper truth lives in the oral traditions, in the songs, the ceremonies, and the names that stretch back beyond written history. Many tribes today maintain a direct, ancestral connection to Yellowstone. The Shoshone, particularly the sheep eaters, or Tukudika, lived within what is now the park year-round. Their name comes from their reliance on mountain sheep, though their diet and culture were as diverse as the land itself. The Tukudika were skilled hunters and craftspeople, carving intricate tools from obsidian and weaving clothing and shelter from bighorn wool, bark, and hide. They moved with the seasons, knew the rhythms of the land, and considered the hot springs and geysers not oddities, but powerful spiritual places. Other tribes, like the Crow, Blackfeet, Flathead, Bannock, Nez Perce, Cheyenne, and Lakota, all had long-standing ties to Yellowstone. For many, it was part of a larger territory, woven into vast seasonal circuits of hunting and gathering. For the Nez Perce, whose name in their own language is Namipu, the land offered not just food, but stories. The geysers were said to be breath from the earth. The hot springs were seen as healing places. Every river had a name, every mountain a memory. To these communities, Yellowstone was not a distant wilderness. It was part of the web of life, a shared space between humans and other beings. The animals were not separate from people, but kin. The land was not owned, but respected. The concept of nature as something apart from humanity did not exist. There was only the whole, the circle. But by the 1800s, that circle was being broken. As settlers moved westward, fueled by gold, land, and expansion, they brought with them new ways of seeing the world. Land was no longer kin, but commodity. Boundaries were drawn. Railroads pushed forward, and in 1872, Yellowstone was declared the first national park in the United States, and by some accounts, the world. It was hailed as a triumph, a preservation of nature, but for many Native people, it was also a moment of loss. Because with the creation of Yellowstone National Park came exclusion. The logic of the time insisted that in order to protect a landscape, it must be emptied of its human inhabitants. Officials viewed indigenous presence as a threat to the idea of untouched wilderness. And so, the people who had lived with and cared for this land for thousands of years were forced out. Their stories were dismissed, their trails closed, their fires extinguished. Rangers were instructed to enforce a vision of nature as separate from human life, even though that vision was itself a European invention. The Tukudika, who had lived quietly in the high mountains, were declared extinct by policy, not because they had vanished, but because they no longer fit the government's idea of Indianness. The Nez Perce in 1877 fled through the park during their long and tragic journey toward Canada, pursued by the U.S. Army. Along the way, they passed thermal basins and rivers they had visited peacefully for generations, but this time, the land could not protect them. Over a century, the official story of Yellowstone erased its first human caretakers. Park signs spoke of geology and geysers, of bears and bison, but not of the people who named those places, long before English ever arrived. The myth of wilderness as pristine became a kind of national scripture, and the absence of native voices was not seen as silence, but as evidence that they had never been here. But of course they had, and they are still here. In recent decades, that narrative has begun to shift, slowly but meaningfully. Today, over 27 tribal nations are recognized as having cultural and ancestral ties to the Yellowstone region. Some participate in park consultation and stewardship. Others work to repatriate artifacts or conduct ceremonies in traditional locations. Still others are rebuilding broken relationships with the land, reclaiming language, restoring place names, and reasserting their presence. For example, obsidian tools traced to Yellowstone have been found as far away as the Mississippi River, a testament to the vast trade routes and cultural connections that once crisscrossed this continent. Now, native archaeologists are using both Western science and indigenous knowledge to re-examine these stories, offering interpretations that see the past not as static but alive. And in 2022, to mark the 150th anniversary of the park's founding, the Yellowstone Tribal Heritage Center was opened at Old Faithful, a space dedicated to elevating native voices, sharing their histories, and reminding all visitors that this land has never been empty. Still, challenges remain. Tribal access to sacred sites is limited. Hunting rights are debated. Cultural resource protection is uneven. And the deeper work, the work of recentering indigenous presence in how we understand and manage Yellowstone, is far from finished. But change begins with acknowledgement, with listening, because if you stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, or walk the old trails through Lamar, or sit beside a steaming spring in the hush of morning, you are walking on stories. Stories that go back not 150 years, but thousands. Stories not written in stone, but spoken in prayer, in language, in firelight and dance. The geysers that throw visitors today were once honored as sacred. The rivers that host fly fishermen once fed entire communities. The meadows that now echo with tourists' footsteps once echoed with the pounding of high drums and laughter and song. These are not romantic notions. They are truths. And they are not gone. They are waiting to be remembered. Indigenous cultures do not draw sharp lines between past and present. Time moves in circles. A place is never just a place. It is a living being with memory and spirit. And Yellowstone, despite everything, still remembers. The land holds these stories close. And if we listen carefully, in the wind through the pines, in the call of a raven, in the rhythm of hoofbeats on soil, we might hear them again. Because Yellowstone is not just a marvel of geology or a sanctuary for wildlife. It is, and has always been, a human place. Not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of relationship. People of the land are still here, still watching, still loving, still fighting for the right to return, to be seen, to be heard. The park was founded in 1872, but its story did not begin there. It began with footprints in the snow, with obsidian tools shaped by hand, with the quiet prayers whispered into steam rising from sacred springs. The land remembers, and now, slowly, finally, we are learning to remember too. To walk the banks of the Yellowstone River, or to sit among the steam vents of Mammoth, is to feel the ancient stillness of the land, a stillness that for generations moved without the weight of maps or borders. But eventually, that stillness was broken. People from beyond the mountains began to speak of a place filled with boiling rivers and smoking earth, of canyons painted in gold, of waterfalls plunging from nowhere. They spoke of Yellowstone, not as a home, not as a relative, but as a discovery. This is the strange duality of Yellowstone's origin story. It is a land that was never lost, and yet was found. It was known intimately by indigenous peoples for over 10,000 years. Yet in the eyes of the United States, its story began only when white explorers put it on paper. And so we must begin with a moment of misunderstanding, because the story of Yellowstone's protection begins with people who refuse to believe it existed at all. In the early 1800s, fur trappers and mountain men returned from expeditions into the Rocky Mountains with strange, fragmented stories. They spoke of rivers that hissed with steam, of bubbling mud, of cliffs that glowed red in the sunset, and wolves that walked beside boiling springs. One man, John Coulter, a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, left the main party in 1807 and wandered into what would become Yellowstone. When he returned, he described a place of fire and brimstone, where geysers exploded from the ground and lakes hissed with heat. People laughed. They called it Coulter's Hell. To them it sounded like fantasy, the tall tales of a mountain man half mad from hunger and solitude. But Coulter wasn't lying, and he wasn't alone. Over the next few decades, others came. Trappers from the Hudson's Bay Company, itinerant hunters, curious geologists, all brought back similar accounts of sulfur-scented air, of rainbow-colored pools, of bison herds that stretched to the horizon, and still the wider world remained skeptical. It wasn't until the latter half of the 19th century that Yellowstone truly entered the American imagination. The first major turning point came with the Cook-Folsom-Peterson expedition of 1869. These were not rugged trappers, but educated men, surveyors and explorers who kept detailed notes, measured altitudes, sketched what they saw. Their journals, quiet, meticulous, wide-eyed, were shared among curious intellectuals and began to stir interest beyond the West. But it was the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition of 1870 that truly captured the public's attention. Led by Henry Washburn, the Surveyor General of Montana Territory, the group included Nathaniel Langford, a former banker and politician, Lieutenant Gustavus Doane, representing the U.S. Army, and several others. They were not just explorers, they were chroniclers. Langford, in particular, wrote long, sweeping essays about what he saw. He described the upper and lower falls of the Yellowstone River, the geysers, the grand prismatic spring, glowing with color. His writing was vivid, dramatic, at times reverent. This time, people listened. And then, in 1871, came the expedition that would change everything. Led by geologist Ferdinand V. Hayden, the Hayden Geological Survey of 1871 was a government-sponsored scientific mission, a full-scale expedition complete with scientists, artists, and a photographer. It was the first time Yellowstone had been formally studied, mapped, and documented by professionals, and it was also the first time its wonders had been seen, not just through words, but through images. William Henry Jackson, the expedition's photographer, carried heavy glass plates and cumbersome equipment through wild terrain, capturing some of the first photographs of Yellowstone's geysers, canyons, and formations. Meanwhile, Thomas Moran, a painter, created breathtaking canvases that brought Yellowstone's colors and scale to life in ways no photograph could. His famous painting, The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, would later hang in the halls of Congress. The timing, politically, could not have been more perfect. America, having just emerged from the Civil War, was undergoing a kind of national reimagining. The West, vast, mysterious, largely unmapped, offered a chance to dream again. Railroads were expanding, settlement was intensifying, and in Washington, D.C., some lawmakers began to worry that if Yellowstone wasn't protected, it would be claimed, mined, parceled, and sold. Its geysers turned to spas, its canyons into quarries. And so, with the help of Hayden Langford and the visual impact of Moran's art, a revolutionary idea began to take root. What if, for the first time in history, a government set aside a place not for profit, or conquest, or farming, but simply for preservation? On March 1st, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act into law. It declared that the Yellowstone region would be hereby reserved and withdrawn from settlement, occupancy, or sale, and dedicated and set apart as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. With the stroke of a pen, the world's first national park was born. There were no blueprints, no models to follow, no established park service, no rangers, no policies. Yellowstone was an experiment, a promise made with noble intent, but little clarity about how to keep it. In those early years, the park struggled. Poachers hunted bison with impunity, vandals defaced formations, visitors took souvenirs from geyser basins. The first superintendent, Nathaniel Langford himself, was unpaid and lacked authority. It was, as he later described, protection in name only. That changed in 1886, when the U.S. Army was brought in to administer the park. Soldiers from Fort Yellowstone, still standing today in Mammoth Hot Springs, enforced regulations, built infrastructure, and laid the groundwork for park management. For 30 years, Yellowstone was essentially under martial stewardship, and oddly enough, it worked. The soldiers protected wildlife, fought fires, and discouraged illegal settlement. They created order in what had been a vulnerable place. And then, in 1916, the next great step in Yellowstone's story was taken: the creation of the National Park Service. With the passage of the Organic Act, the U.S. government formally established an agency to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. Yellowstone, the first experiment, became the flagship, the proof that preservation was possible and meaningful. But behind the triumph, there is a shadow, because the creation of Yellowstone, while revolutionary in spirit, came at a cost, one that was, and still is, largely carried by the indigenous peoples of the region. As we saw in Chapter 7, the establishment of Yellowstone as a park required the removal of native tribes who had lived on and with this land for millennia. Their rights to hunt, to gather, to perform ceremony, all were stripped away in the name of protection. A land that had once been shared became fenced. A home became a postcard. The very idea of wilderness, wild, empty, untouched, erased the fact that this place had never been empty at all. This is the complicated truth at the heart of Yellowstone's origin, that even the noblest protections can carry harm when they are rooted in erasure. And yet, from that flawed beginning, something enduring and beautiful emerged. Yellowstone became a symbol, not just for America, but for the world. It inspired the creation of other national parks, Yosemite, Sequoia, Zion, Grand Canyon, and eventually, parks across every continent. The idea that nature has intrinsic value, that some places are worth preserving, not for what they produce, but simply for what they are, changed global consciousness. Today, over 100 countries have national park systems, and it all began here, in Yellowstone, with steam rising from the earth, with herds of bison silhouetted in morning frost, with waterfalls plunging into painted canyons, with a dream that the land itself could be protected for everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the powerful, but for anyone who wished to walk quietly beneath trees and feel something older than themselves. Yellowstone is not perfect. It was born of paradox, preservation and displacement, wonder and myth. But it evolved, it learned, and in doing so, it gave us one of the most powerful ideas humanity has ever imagined. That the wild has value, that the earth is not simply ours to consume, that future generations, those unborn, deserve to see what we have seen, a place untouched, a place alive, a place that remembers. If you visit Yellowstone on a summer morning, you'll likely be far from alone. The parking lot at Old Faithful will be full before 9 a.m. Car doors slam, children chase chipmunks, tourists lean over railings, eyes wide, phones held aloft. A ranger in a wide-brimmed hat gestures toward the steaming earth and begins to tell a story. Someone gasps as the geyser erupts, a plume of white water shooting into the sky, ancient and reliable as breath. This is Yellowstone today, still wild, still sacred, but no longer remote. The world has found it. Each year, Yellowstone welcomes over 4 million visitors. They come from every continent, every walk of life. Families on road trips, retired couples and campers, scientists with notebooks, artists with watercolors, Instagrammers, hikers, poets, dreamers, people who have never seen a bison before, people who have returned every year since they were children. Yellowstone is no longer a mystery hidden in the Rockies. It is a global destination, a pilgrimage site for those seeking nature at its most elemental. And yet, beneath the surface of this wonder lies a complex truth. Because Yellowstone is not just a park, it is a living system, vast, intricate, and vulnerable. And in today's world, even a protected place is not protected from everything. So let's step into this present moment, into the beating heart of Yellowstone as it is now, a place caught between its past and its future, a place beloved by millions and watched over with careful eyes, a place alive with beauty and burden. There is no question that Yellowstone's popularity is a testament to its power. To stand before the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, to hear the deep rumble of lower falls, to watch bison grazing on the plains, these are experiences that change people. They awaken something ancient, something patient. For many visitors, it is the first time they felt small in the best possible way. And tourism has benefits. Entrance fees fund research and infrastructure. Local economies from West Yellowstone, Montana to Jackson Hole, Wyoming depend on the flow of travelers. And exposure to wildness, even through a windshield, can plant seeds of care and conservation that last a lifetime. But the sheer volume of visitors also comes at a cost. During peak summer months, Yellowstone's most popular areas become crowded. Lines form at restrooms, trails wear thin, traffic jams form not because of construction, but because a bear has wandered too close to the road and everyone has stopped to photograph it. Rangers must perform crowd control, not in stadiums but in meadows. The ecological impacts, though less visible, are real. Soil compaction from millions of footsteps can damage delicate plant communities. Off-trail hiking scars sensitive habitats. Wildlife become habituated to human presence, or in some cases dangerously comfortable around food. There are stories every year of people getting too close to bison, bears, or geysers. Some end in warning, others, tragically, in injury or death. And then there's the infrastructure itself. Roads, boardwalks, lodges, all designed to allow access without damaging the very thing people come to see. It's a delicate balance, one that requires constant attention, constant adaptation. Yellowstone's managers walk a tightrope, welcoming the world without overwhelming the land. But Yellowstone is more than what you see from the roadside. It is one of the most studied ecosystems on Earth, a place where science is always watching, always listening, and what the science reveals is breathtaking. Yellowstone is home to over 1,000 species of native plants, 67 species of mammals, 300 species of birds, and hundreds of insects, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. It is a mosaic of habitats, from alpine tundra to geothermal basins, from pine forest to sagebrush steppe. At the top of the food web, wolves, bears, and cougars roam. In the middle, elk, deer, and pronghorn graze. Beneath them, rodents tunnel, insects pollinate, and bacteria do the invisible work of life. Nothing here stands alone. Everything is part of a web, and that web is sensitive. Since wolves were reintroduced in 1995, their impact on the park has been profound. Elk populations have adjusted, allowing willow and aspen to regrow. Beavers have returned, bringing their ponds and wetlands. Birds, fish, and amphibians have followed. It is one of the clearest examples of a trophic cascade, how a single species, reintroduced, can ripple through an entire system. But Yellowstone's ecology is not frozen in time. It changes, it evolves, and today it faces new challenges. Beneath Yellowstone Lake, cold, vast, and glacial, a quiet war is being waged. In the 1990s, non-native lake trout were discovered in the lake's depths. Likely introduced illegally, these deep-dwelling predators began preying on native cutthroat trout, which had once been abundant and critical to the park's food chain. Grizzly bears, bald eagles, otters, and osprey all relied on cutthroat trout, especially during spring spawning runs. With their numbers dwindling, the effects echoed outward. Since their discovery, the park has mounted a major effort to remove the invaders. Each summer, specialized crews deploy nets across Yellowstone Lake, capturing tens of thousands of lake trout. It is laborious, expensive, and ongoing, but the stakes are high. Because in a system as interconnected as Yellowstone's, a single invasive species can unweave the whole fabric. On land, other invaders lurk: cheatgrass, which burns easily and outcompetes native grasses; white pine blister rust, a fungus killing off ancient trees; mountain pine beetles, once kept in check by cold winters, now thriving as temperatures warm. Every battle is a reminder that even in a protected place, nothing is guaranteed. Amid all this science and stewardship, Yellowstone is still, first and foremost, a place for people. Visitors still arrive every day, hearts open, eyes wide, Children press their faces to the glass at visitor centers. Couples hike to backcountry lakes. Elders return to the same overlooks they visited half a century ago. The magic remains. And increasingly, the park is listening more carefully to whose voices are present in that magic. Indigenous tribes are working with the National Park Service to restore access, tell stories, and reconnect with ancestral homelands. Accessibility advocates are working to ensure trails and experiences are open to all. Researchers are partnering with artists and writers to expand the language we use to describe the wild. Yellowstone is not just a place to observe, it is a place to belong. And in the face of all its challenges, the crowds, the climate, the change, it remains, somehow, steady, a reminder of what the earth looks like when it is allowed to follow its own rhythm. And so, as the light begins to soften over the ridges of Lamar, as the steam rises slow and silver from the geyser basins, as elk move like shadows across the twilight meadows, our story comes to a close. But Yellowstone's story does not. It goes on, in every gust of geothermal wind, in every snowflake that falls in silence on the Caldera, in every hoofprint pressed into riverbank mud. It continues in the slow breath of the earth, pulsing just beneath our feet, in the rustle of pine needles under an owl's wings, in the footsteps of a child seeing a bison for the first time, their eyes wide with a kind of wonder we spend our whole lives chasing. We've traveled far together in these 2 hours, across time, across stone, through steam and storm and fire. We've followed glaciers and magma, bison and wolves, scientists and storytellers. We've stood at the edge of the abyss and the lip of a geyser. We've listened, not just to facts and figures, but to something older, something still. And maybe, just maybe, we've remembered that the world doesn't need to be loud to be extraordinary. In Yellowstone, the earth reminds us that beauty isn't always neat. It bubbles, it burns, it breaks and remakes itself over and over again. And through it all, it endures, not untouched, but alive. This is why it matters, not because it's perfect, but because it teaches us how to be present, how to pay attention, how to care for what we cannot control. So wherever you are tonight, whether the stars are bright or hidden, whether you're near a forest or far from the mountains, I hope you carry a little piece of Yellowstone with you, in the way you walk a little slower, in the way you listen to the wind, in the way you look at the world, not as something to conquer, but as something to protect. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, some stories are told not in words, but in wind and water and wildness. Good night.